Good afternoon and welcome to this concurrent session. My name is Terry Wallace. I'm the Executive Director of Driver Programs for Alberta. I'm also the Alberta representative on Driver and Vehicle Committee and am the Vice Chair of that committee. I will be your moderator for today's session. The presentation will last approximately an hour and there'll be a question and answer period at the end. Karen will have the microphone. If you want to ask a question, we're recording this so that we can put it up on the website. So please wait till Karen gets there and so we can record the questions and the answers. The name of the presentation is Framing the Future for Transportation. To discuss this topic, we have Mr. Claudio DeRose from the Ministry of Transportation in Ontario. Claudio began his current role as Director, Safety Policy and Education Branch, Ministry of Transportation, in June 2015. In this role, Claudio provides strategic direction for the development of an integrated approach to policy and program development, including the establishment, facilitation of effective partnerships to improve road safety. I don't know who wrote this, but they like you, man. It's all good. So with that, we're going to turn it over to Claudio. And
all right. Good afternoon, everyone. So just before I begin, I want to thank Heidi Francis. Heidi is our leader in road safety in Ontario. She really wanted us to make sure we had a good conversation here at CCMTA to talk about some of the things that we're dealing with in terms of some of the challenges and issues we're dealing with to prepare for the future. And I also want to thank my colleagues who are here today who are really driving a lot of the work that we're going to talk about. So thank you guys for being here. I'm going to start with just a little bit of background. And before I talk about what the future looks like, and it's going to be a really nice picture I'm going to show you, but I think it's important that we take a step back for a second. And Maureen and I, who traveled together from Toronto to come up here, before one of our flights gave me a really interesting package, an e-book that her branch is preparing in support of Ontario's 150 celebration. And the book that she gave me is really a compilation of important milestones that have happened since 1903 right up until today that look at all the important things that have happened in the province of Ontario when it comes to licensing and registering vehicles. And it's really interesting in terms of looking back to see what the people who came before us were dealing with and how they went forward in planning the solutions that they put in place. So just bear with me, it is going to be connected to the presentation. So in 1903 is the first time in Ontario that we registered a motor vehicle, in 1903. And there were 178 cars registered that year. The cost for an initial registration was $2, and the cost for a renewal was $1. And also in 1903 is the first time Ontario had legislation to deal with the regulation of the operation of an automobile on a highway. 1905 is the first time Ontario introduced suspensions for drivers. It wasn't until the 1920s until laws came into place to deal with impairment in driving. In the 1930s, Ontario introduced a demerit point system to regulate driver behavior. We also introduced road tests and driver license requirements in the 1930s. And in the late 50s, we introduced a set of driver treatment programs. So if you look at 1903, it took 60 years to get to a place where government had the foundational policies, legislative, regulatory, program development, and program offering needed to support the arrival of the automobile in society. And this takes me to what I want to talk about today, which is the future of mobility and the new mobility ecosystem. How many people here have heard about smart mobility or the new mobility ecosystem? A few people. That's great. So the new mobility ecosystem, I'm going to really talk about this in simple terms. And what it really means is that there's a lot of things happening today. We don't know how it's all going to land. This is a very neat linear picture that makes it look like we know what's happening, and it makes it look like we know how to organize the future, but in reality, we really don't. So the new mobility ecosystem means there's a couple of important factors that governments and industry need to deal with. The first is that the new ecosystem of the future doesn't revolve only around the automobile. It's an integrated multimodal transportation network that it talks about. It talks about the connection of high-speed rail, subways, cars, bikes. and many new types of vehicles that we don't even know that exist today. Has huge impacts on government from a taxation and revenue point of view. Huge opportunity and huge challenge in terms of getting the public to understand what it all means. Shifting public behavior, whether it's pedestrians, drivers, transit riders, big shifts are required there. And also, one of the most interesting things that this new future bears is really much fewer people owning cars and different ways in which people will get around, and new ways of what car riding and car sharing means. So in this multi-phased ecosystem of the future, there's 4 key phases. And I look at this from a 30-year point of view. There's people who, I'm talking about it from a 30-year point of view. There's lots of other organizations and consulting firms that will go further out. You know, for the purposes of today's presentation, going anywhere beyond 30 years is really not rational because there's so many unknowns. But if you bear with me and look at the next 30 years, there's 4 phases of change that are happening. The first is where we're at today, which is more and more drive assist technology being added to vehicles that people own and drive. And this is in no way going to define the future, but it's where we're at today. So you have to kind of take the future in 2 to 5 year incremental periods and deal with what's happening. So that's the first element of it. The second phase is a car sharing phase where people will shift into owning a vehicle and sharing the same vehicle across multiple drivers. The third phase is the driverless revolution. We hear a lot about that. This is the phase where driverless cars become economically affordable for people. They're viable, they're safe, they're tested, and they become adopted to be on public roads. And then the fourth phase, which is the final phase, is the convergence of driverless vehicles with the concept of shared mobility, where you're not going to have people owning their vehicles, but are going to figure out clever ways to get around, whether it's fleet car services or ride-sharing services. That is the final stage that we're looking at. So it's very interesting. You look at the picture here, it looks like, you know, we're going to be able to get from home to the office and back home in a much easier, cleaner fashion, but it's going to take us a long time to be able to sort through the future so that the experience is as linear as it looks here. So what does this all mean? Well, it means that as jurisdictions, whether it's in any sector you're looking at this whole new system of the future, it means that we need to start talking about how do we get ready for that system. And while we need to take things in increments, we need to look at that long-term view and through forums like this at CCMTA, have those conversations around, well, what do we need? How do we harmonize regulations or policies or practices so that we're taking a common view, understanding things that are coming in a consistent fashion, but also dealing with things in a common way with a common voice and with consistent messaging, because the public looks to government to explain and rationalize all the changes, and they're expecting government to be able to put into place the right structures to make sense of all this chaos and make it fit into a safe paradigm. We're very proud of our road safety record in Ontario, and I know we are across Canada as well. So we need to really think about living in the future and take steps that we need to put in place so that when these things come online, people are safe and feel confident that things have been thought through. So a little bit about the Ministry of Transportation. I think it's very similar to some of the other transportation departments across the country. Our goal is to be a leader in moving people safely and efficiently. Obviously, there's a lot of peripheral interests we have, whether it's supporting climate change initiatives and economic development initiatives. These are all things that we balance day to day. All of our success and all of the things we do revolve around strong partnerships with enforcement partners, with other stakeholders such as the OTA and others that we have developed over time. But the future is also one where we have important partners that we don't even know about yet. There's so much that needs to be done. as I'll talk more through some of the key issues we're dealing with, there's more partnerships that are required. Government alone doesn't have answers to all these wicked issues that are coming at us as part of that new ecosystem of the future. The other thing I want to say about our ministry is we invest a lot of our resources into research. The research is critically important for us to be able to understand how to deal with what trends are coming, what the future trends are, and what the rational approaches are to put into place to deal with these changes that are coming. And I'll talk about all of these things as I go through the rest of this presentation. So if you look at who we serve today, I really want to focus on this slide over here, which is 20 years from now, we're looking at about a 25% to 30% increase in licensed drivers, registered vehicles, and commercial vehicles. That's huge. And to take those numbers in isolation doesn't really mean that much, because the challenge is not just that there's increasing numbers, the challenge is everything that's going on around these numbers. So, for example, in the part of the GTA I live, there is a huge amount of population growth, and there's a lot of population growth happening in the whole province of Ontario. You've got roads that were set up as arterial roads that now have huge condo developments, new businesses showing up on these roads, more and more large trucks traveling on these roads. Also, you have more pedestrians and cyclists traveling on these roads. There is so much change happening when you just look at these numbers. And that requires us to take those incremental approach to policy and program design to make sure we understand what these changes mean in terms of not only more licensed drivers and vehicles on the road, but all road users need to be safe. You've also got more and more people commuting in vehicles, and the projection for people commuting in vehicles outside of the GTA growing exponentially, whereas within the GTA, we're seeing already a small decrease in car ownership. The other sort of trend that fits into all of this is within the young people with licenses, we're already seeing in cities such as Toronto, Peterborough, Barrie, and Waterloo, a slight decrease in the percentage of young people with licenses. So this is all information that is coming to us. We're trying to rationalize it and make it fit so that we can understand it, but there's a lot happening, and it's a very chaotic kind of collection of data that we need to put into a framework to be able to understand what the multimodal transportation system that the people of Ontario need. And I'm sure that's the same for everyone in this room from your own jurisdiction. You have your own data sets that are coming at you, and you need to fit it into a proper sort of plan for the future. And within our ministry, we are working on a 30 to 50 year transportation plan, and all of this stuff is being negotiated into what that framework should look like. The other thing that's important is the large trucks. So large trucks today, I think we heard from Mr. Bradley's presentation next door, 60% of goods moved within the province of Ontario today are moved through large trucks. That trend is projected to continue to stay the same, if not increase. So that's another big factor that we need to think about as we plan for moving into that future world. So I want to talk a little bit about who do we serve. And I'm not going to go through all the little boxes that you see, but generally speaking, we serve commercial drivers. We serve carrier companies, licensed drivers, medical practices, seniors, you name it, we serve it. We serve them. And what's important about this is that this is our bread and butter, and this is what we do every single day. But we know that the world around our fundamental programs and services is changing rapidly. And what we need to do, and what we strive to do every day, my colleagues and I, is we try to look at what is the change, and how can we embrace the change and drive it into our programs. A lot of what is required is challenging the norm and really listening to our customers and understanding what the expectations are so that we can set up a future way of interacting with them that makes sense, that is more efficient, but also improves safety. So how do we do that? We do that in three main ways. And when I talk about embracing change, a lot of it is we need to understand what technology is available. We need to understand how technology can make our programs and our administrative expectations more efficient, but also how can we increase customer satisfaction and also improve road safety. And as I said, while we have a 30-year view on the horizon, we're taking things in a 5-year incremental period at a time to be able to manage and stay the course on important work that is needed to be done. So, and we also know that research is important, as I talked about. So the research that is required on things like legalization of marijuana, or how do you get all these new commercial carriers through an inspection station faster, all of those things, all the range of activities that we do on a day-to-day basis requires quite a substantial amount of research to understand that business line and what the future could look like in that business line so that we can prepare for what's on the horizon. And finally, modernization is the biggest thing happening within our ministry and within our part of the ministry in road safety is modernization, where we're looking at our huge, enormous database and way of working with all the folks that we interact with and trying to bring it into a future which is a digital future and an online future. So the first thing I want to talk a little bit about is technology. And what are we looking at in terms of what can help us pave the way forward? Telematics is one thing we're extremely interested in, and I know it's something that, from a futuristic standpoint, there's a lot of opportunity with what can be installed in a vehicle, whether it's from the car manufacturer themselves or whether it can be added later to help regulate a driver's behavior. We look at all of our programs, young novice drivers, for example. We have high-risk drivers, people who have, maybe multiple speeding tickets or have been convicted with, drinking and driving. And we need to think about what can we do to support these drivers. If they're going to be in a regulated driving program, we need to do a better job of supporting them or understanding what their behaviors are. And they need to have a better understanding of what their behaviors are. And telematics really presents a very interesting opportunity for us to look at how we can tweak our programs a little bit and have a telematics device maybe added to a toolkit that our driver improvement counselors may use, or have it as something we can add to support young and novice drivers as they learn and become more comfortable to drive. So we're looking at how we might be able to leverage these telematics devices into our programs and really trying to understand who can benefit most from this type of approach going forward. All right. The next one I want to talk a little bit about is automated traffic enforcement. I know there's a few police officers in the room today, and I know from working with you that there are today more and more demands than ever placed on law enforcement. And one of the things that happens to exist in parallel to increasing demand on law enforcement is more and more technical capacity for automated enforcement to be out there to keep our roads safe. I'll give you an example. If you have a chance to YouTube something that Chief Cox shared with me from the OPP, is this device called Cop on a Stick. You should go on YouTube and check out the video. It's quite amazing what a LiDAR technology on a pole can do. The capacity for having a camera type of device put on the side of a road that can track hundreds of cars over multi-lanes to not only just track what the speed the car is traveling at, but whether a car is making an improper turn or whether a car is, whether the driver of the car is distracted, or if they're not obeying a certain sign, or if they're in a construction zone and they need to slow down, or whatever the violation is, there is technology coming that is able to detect a driver behavior and can get ahead of having to have a police officer there to witness something. There is technology that can always be around to help support drivers and to help keep our roads safe. And there's a lot of opportunity with that. So I talked about the multi-lane, long-distance vehicle tracking. We've got enforcement of speed at intersections, violations like tailgating, illegal turns, and on and on and on. There's so much that we don't know about automated technology. It's not just your sort of automated speed enforcement. There could be much, much more. And that's something that we need to look at and work with our enforcement colleagues to learn more about how that might fit into the future. Next thing I want to talk about is automated vehicles. This by far is the one area that we work on that I get the most questions about. The number one question people have is, when are these automated vehicles coming en masse? And, there's lots of projections that exist. My answer is sooner rather than later. And we need to understand as much as we can by working with partners of the auto manufacturers, technology companies, academics, who really understand this a lot better than government officials do, so that we know what we need to know. This is such a rapidly evolving area that requires strong partnerships, but also we need to know how to embrace it when it's ready. Ontario does have a pilot that permits testing for automated vehicles. There's a lot of interest in expanding that pilot, in amending some of the terms of that pilot so that we can allow more and more types of testing. And it's something we're very interested in, but we need to understand all the safety impacts, and we need to understand how do other road users that are not in these automated vehicles fit into the picture? And how do you regulate having an automated vehicle on a road that might also have a vehicle with a traditional driver in the car seat? So we know automated vehicles are, in the future, they will provide more mobility options for people who currently can't move around as easily as they want to. We also know there could potentially be quite a significant amount of disruption across multiple industries when it comes to automated vehicles, and insurance companies, for one, are a sector that we're working more and more closely with now to understand what this means from their perspective. The other thing with automated vehicles is that, like many of the things that we're working on, would benefit tremendously from a harmonized approach. In the US, NHTSA and AMVA have worked closely to develop safety standards for automated vehicles. They look good to me, but we need to do that due diligence in Canada to understand whether those safety standards are good enough. And we need to really challenge ourselves and put that microscope down on understanding what are those safety standards, is it enough, and can we harmonize across North America to have those standards in place? If we don't act, the car manufacturers will build them in the way that NHTSA requires, and it'll be too late at that point. So we need to work together to really understand what the technology is, how it works, and what the safety features that governments require, as well as law enforcement and others, so that people are comfortable with these vehicles when they're available, because they are coming. All right. I want to talk a little bit about research. Obviously, it's I said earlier, research is what we need to do a lot of so that we can have a foundational understanding of all the things that are happening. So I'm going to talk about some of the key things that we're conducting some research on now. And the first one is automation. So what do I mean by automation? What I mean by automation is that, and if you take it in a 2 to 5 to 10 year period, what's happening now is vehicle manufacturers are adding all kinds of really elegant, high-demand technology into vehicles. And the buyers of these vehicles love it, and they want more of it. And a lot of the technology actually will support stronger road safety. So, for example, you have things like pedestrian warning systems or lane departure warning systems or automatic speed adjustments. These are very good things to have adapted into a vehicle. But there's other types of technology that are being added in the vehicle which are actually causing more and more distraction. We've recently completed a study working with a partner that has showed us that a lot of this rapidly coming in-vehicle technology is causing drivers to be more and more distracted. This concerns us because in 2014, which is the latest year of data that we have available for all collisions and fatalities, distracted driving now exceeds the number of fatalities that we see from impaired driving or from speeding or any other type of issue. So we need to get ahead of it, and we need to understand it and understand what it means. And you know, when I talk about partnerships, we need to have a better way of engaging with manufacturers around you know, their approach to building vehicles and adding technology. We need to work closely with Transport Canada to understand what this all means and how we might be able to support drivers who are purchasing these cars with this technology. All right, drugs. Drugs is one of the, maybe, I think, the leading challenge in road safety today. I don't think anyone really understands enough of the issues between cannabis and impairment in driving. We certainly don't know enough or have enough tools to support the detection of impaired drivers or to investigate drug-impaired driving at roadside. This is a huge gap. It's a huge hole, and it's urgent, and it's scary because, you know, we're basically 1 year away from the legalization of marijuana, but we don't understand enough about the interaction of cannabis consumption and driving or enforcement. So research is the one way that we can start to close that gap. We have, the federal government is interested in setting standards for oral fluid screening devices. That is, I think, the most proven way to help detect a drug-impaired driver on the road. But we don't necessarily equate presence of drugs with impairment of drugs. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to support our understanding of what presence and impairment means. Also, if you look at the changes that have been introduced in the criminal code, they talk about recent use. And as far as I know, there currently is no standard that exists around what a presence in an oral fluid screening device level means and how that relates to recent use. I know that within the federal government, the Drugs and Driving Committee is looking at that. We're also looking at that. We're looking at all the different reports that are available from an international point of view to help us understand what presence equates to recent use. That's a key thing that the courts will be looking for, and that's a big hole in where we are today. We don't have that. The other thing is we look at, you know, what can be done to support our colleagues in enforcement. And while the standardized field sobriety test exists and has been successful to help deal with tracking drivers who are impaired by alcohol, it doesn't necessarily prove useful fully to detect drug-impaired driving. And so we're looking at, we are providing joint work with a consultant to help us understand how we can enhance the SFST so that it can better detect drugs within a driver. There's another sort of scary thing with drugs is that medical marijuana users across all the different elements of legalization will require exemptions or a different way of dealing with them, whether it's from a public possession limit standpoint or whether it's from a driving standpoint. We don't know enough about the tolerance level and the difference of the tolerance level of a medical marijuana user versus a recreational user and how that might prove to impair their ability to drive. And so all of these things, we in Ontario are partnering with the Center for Addiction and Mental Health to help us understand what impairment means with THC and how that could relate to what we understand as 0.08 for alcohol. We're trying to understand with CAMH as well what the difference in the tolerance level is and how that affects someone's ability to drive, so that we can compare a recreational user to a medical marijuana user, and many other things that are in our plan to better understand cannabis use and driving. So it's a big problem. I think it's a very urgent problem, and it's really one that we shouldn't pretend is we have it in control. We really don't. There's a lot more that we need to do together to get ahead of that. So enhanced road test, this is an interesting one. Our population in Ontario of drivers aged 80 plus is going to more than double in the next 20 years. So we have 350,000 80 plus drivers. We're going to have over almost 900,000 in 2040. That's great. It's really great to have such a vibrant demographic. We want to support these people to make sure that they're also safe drivers. But we also know that with age, the risk around safe driving and age is very well founded. Dementia and other types of illnesses do set in, and we need a way to be able to detect those drivers that are their cognitive abilities are declining, and we need to be able to have efficient and practical ways to test that. And so one of the things that we're working with, and we have done work with TURF on this, is to explore an enhanced road test for seniors, so that in very efficient ways we can support our own staff who are assessing drivers, and all of it is based on strong medical practice and medical philosophies, to be able to observe a senior who's 80 plus on a driving test. And so one thing that can be done to enhance the road test is to add something simple like a pathfinding course, where the individual would have to sort of get in the vehicle, drive, and end up back to the place where they started. So these are simple tweaks that can be done, and without our partners in the medical community, we would not be able to even understand how to begin to support these drivers. But it is something that is coming. It's part of a big demographic change that we're in the middle of right now, and we are preparing to deal with that in a very sort of simple, friendly, efficient way. All right, so modernization. As I mentioned earlier, this is the biggest thing happening within our ministry right now, not only within the road safety, but in the ministry as a whole. The Ontario government has invested over $30 billion to improve public transit and to establish the multimodal transportation network of the future. But from a road safety point of view, we're also looking at understanding how we can shift to better adapt to those societal changes that are happening. And when I talk about modernization, it means a couple of simple things. One is we want to have our programs and services available 24/7. We want them to be available online and digitally, and we want them to be delivered in an efficient way. So it sounds pretty simple, but it is very complex to take, legacy systems and legacy policy and programs and turn them on a dime to be what people's expectations are today. So the first thing that I want to talk a little bit about is truck inspection, and Peter Hurst is here. He's leading this work within the province, and truck inspection is critically important to road safety. The Highway 401 in Ontario between the Quebec border and the Michigan border is the most congested highway in all of North America. More than 50% of all commercial vehicles in Canada travel on that highway. And as I said earlier, the number of commercial carriers is expected to increase between 30 and 50% between now and 2040. So that's a huge amount of attention that needs to be paid to what we do around trucks and truck inspections. So Peter tells me the majority of these trucks travel in good, safe condition, which is great. There's many compliant carriers that we have that unfortunately today have to wait a long time to get into an inspection station and be inspected. And our enforcement officers see only 1% of all of these truck drivers and these trucks. So the opportunity in Ontario is to move towards a mainline pre-clearance system where, through technology, we would be able to monitor multiple lanes of highway, monitor multiple carriers across those multiple lanes, and arrange some sort of pre-clearance system with them where between the inspection station and in the vehicle itself, a driver will know whether or not they need to pull in to be inspected. The screening technology for this does exist today, and we are now in the process of looking for partners to help us understand what the most efficient, rational approach is to implement this system to help us prepare for that future. The other important elements of all of this, as I said earlier, we're very aware of the importance of having transportation support climate change initiatives and economic growth initiatives. This is critically important for the movement of goods in the economy, in free trade, as we heard Mr. Bradley talk about earlier, and also in reducing greenhouse gases. So if you can get these trucks moving and keep moving, there's less greenhouse gas emissions. There's also a huge opportunity here for more and better data collection. And that is also in line to where the future is going. More data, more information, more opportunities to really understand what's going on our roads and how that fits into other imperatives of society. Right, another very exciting thing happening in Ontario in our modernization is the electronic medical submissions and processing. So we currently have a very old, very manual system where medical reports are filed to us through fax, through mail, and we've got a very manually driven review process. That's not good for anyone. That's not good for the individual who needs to have their case reviewed, who needs to implement certain types of controls to support them to get better, and who's ready to get back behind the wheel, but we can't get to them fast enough. So we want to go online. We want to go digital. We want to support the submission of these forms to be done in an electronic way. We want to have our staff have an easier time in making their adjudications on each of these claims. And again, modern day electronic capabilities exist. We just need to design the right programs that meet what those customer expectations are, that interface with the medical community in a way that makes sense to them. This is a really exciting initiative. It's right at the initial phase right now. And I know it's going to be great because Paul Brown is leading it, and it's a key focus for him every day. All right, IRP. This is another initiative that my colleague Peter Hurst is leading. And in August of 2015, Ontario did introduce online services for IRP. Again, very critically important for supporting the effective movement of goods and services and supporting trade. The carrier community has been using these online services. There's a lot of good uptake on what we're seeing. The services are available 24/7. At the counter, we've reduced the workload for our staff. And to get to a point of an effective launch and a sustained effective offering does require extensive stakeholder consultation. And I know Peter and his team have broadly engaged with key stakeholders and done the system design with their interests and their feedback and input at the heart of it. And that's a critically important part of effective design. And we've also learned that sustained communications to drive people to that online channel is critically important. Figuring out what the incentives are from a communication standpoint to move people online it's an ongoing challenge, and it's something we need to work with our stakeholders to get a strong understanding of the most effective ways to communicate. And some of it might be to mail things out. Some of it might be through email or social media. So we're looking at all of that. We want to support what we've done, and I think it's been a great success, but we need to keep expanding that. And speaking of expanding, we are expanding to add new functionality, and Peter's in the process of adding some new fields into the online service that's offered, and that'll be ready in the fall of this year. All right, a mobile driver's license. We've been talking about this one for a long time. Okay. You know, I have everything I want and need on my phone, but I still have to carry my wallet because I have my driver's license in my wallet. I can't get into my car. I can't get onto a plane without my driver's license. I think we all know that there's people out there that run multi-million-dollar companies from their smartphone, but we still require them to carry a driver's license. I think we can all concede that this isn't working anymore. We need to do better. We have to do better. You know, if you have a 40-year-old guy telling you that, go and talk to a 16 and 18-year-old about what their expectations are. The younger generation has everything they want and need on their phone. They don't need to carry a credit card or an Interac card. They can pay with their phone. I think it's time that we start looking at what the opportunities around a mobile driver license might be. There's many jurisdictions in the world that have adopted this quite successfully. And the other part of it is what an amazing opportunity it is for government to also realize huge opportunities, things like reducing cases of fraud or reducing high operating costs, getting better data that you can then use to generate more revenue for government programs. Logan is my colleague that's leading this work. I know that he's in the middle of figuring out, you know, what are the leading jurisdictions doing? How do we effectively engage with stakeholders on this? What are some of the innovative technologies that can be adapted in Ontario? And also the important part of this is, you know, what are some of the important policy and regulatory things that need to be in place to support the adoption of online mobile driver license? All right, mandatory entry-level training. So my colleague Maureen has led this initiative for the last couple of years in Ontario and has made a lot of new friends, I know, as a result. And again, I think we heard Mr. Bradley talk next door earlier about, you know, what is truck driving and the changing elements of truck driver careers as more and more of a professional designation. And mandatory entry-level training certainly meets what the stakeholder expectations are and also deals with the ongoing history of inconsistent training standards that our truck drivers, our large truck drivers, get when they're learning to drive these large trucks. And, you know, there's some registered schools, there's some unregistered schools. We don't really care. We just want there to be a standard curriculum, and we want them to test for it and to meet the standards so that they're safe on our roads. And starting July of this year, July 1st, we will have all new applicants for commercial Class A drivers. It'll be mandatory for them to complete an entry-level course to support their career as a driver. Okay. So within our road user safety division, we are the first jurisdiction in North America to implement a modern integrated licensing and registration solution that supports our carrier safety monitoring program, and we're very proud of that. Some of the really important fundamental and foundational elements of that revolve around a single client. That's a very innovative thing. It's like 40 years way too late, but we know that, you know, there is a need to have government systems be able to link all the important interactions that relate to a single driver across multiple programs. And again, as I talked about earlier, the supporting them to interact with government through online, we call it revolutionary. I think it's just really meeting what some people's expectations are. I think it's great. We have much more work to do. I do want to talk a little bit about one client, one record. One client, one record is the basic requirement that any individual who interacts with government is looking for. If you're Jason for renewing your driver license, you're also Jason who needs to renew your commercial vehicle. You're also Jason who needs whatever other vehicle or licensing issue that you may need. We're starting with a focus on carrier. We're extending it in the future into our driver database as well. This is part of the plan. It's been budgeted for, and it's something that we're really excited about getting into down the road. So, clients online, not in line. I think the vision here is, we don't want people standing around waiting at a counter to get service. We want them to be able to access what they need 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that is really just what the expectation is. And so when we look at our modernization plan, a lot of the foundational vision has been landed. We know we want, and we know that we have through our great partnership with our partners, a strong technology platform that is scalable and flexible. It'll allow us to get into modernizing our driver and vehicle database, as well as everything we need to do for our commercial clients. It's supporting our medical service modernization. And it's something that can also be extended across ministries and even across provinces as we continue to support those milestones in our innovative path forward. So really, the future is really one where it's scary. There's a lot of chaos. We don't understand what it all means or what's coming at us today or what'll be coming at us tomorrow. But we do know that the future is one from a service delivery standpoint where we want to be digital, we want to be client-focused, and we want to be agile. So I think I'm going to stop there, Terry. Thank you.
We'll now open the floor for questions. I just want to remind you, please raise your hand. Karen will come over with the mic, and then we can record the questions and the answers.
Hi, Claudio. You talked about mobile DL, but over here, Mark.
Oh, there you are. Sorry.
But have you got any plans to move towards mobile, like a vehicle registration licensing documentation?
Yeah, I think that the mobile licensing registration exists right now. I mean, it's an online service that Ontario does have. You can renew your driver's license online. I think, we look at all the driver and vehicle services, from, those high volume kinds of things. A lot of them can be done online. When you look at the digital driver license, that requires more of a foundational way of identity authentication, which, there's various degrees of critical, things that need to be locked down from a data integrity point of view. And getting a driver license and a driver license renewal does have a higher level of risk associated with it than just a renewal. But certainly, I think that our partnership with Service Ontario is supporting moving in that direction. I don't know, Logan, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I mean, we're coming up with sort of a DL strategy, and if you're shipping things online, like a mobile driver's license, does the customer want to have a registration card in that? Do you want to, I'm sure we have, your organ donor card, you want that to be part of the mobile driver's license. Instead of carrying around the paint insurance or whatever color you have, you want to add that to your menu that's going on mobile phone. So I think those are things that we're all contemplating. And I think the consumer, they don't want to be reaching into their glove compartment and seeing 5 pink sheets that are 8 years old, like we all do have. They want to be able to have those things at their fingertips. So those are things that
Leave it to Ontario not to follow the rules. Speak into the mic, Logan.
Terry, I'll buy you a beer.
Okay. Yeah, I want that recorded.
I got the mic, but it's turned off. Oh, no, it's on. It's on. There you go. I've been out of the industry now for a few years. I'm a former owner-operator, and for anybody who doesn't know, I'm the only president OBAC ever had. Former president of the Alberta Truck and Industry Safety Association and former Canadian rep for OIDA. My question is, first of all, I want to applaud you on the entry-level driver training. Huge step forward. My question is, have you gone far enough? Are professional drivers going to be recognized as a trade, similar to your plumbers and electricians, with a vocational certificate? If it has, then I think you're on the right track. So I'm just curiosity question.
Yeah. So this is going to be a Team Ontario thing for the Q&A. So if you can give that mic to Maureen, she'll be able to answer that.
There you go. See? So in terms of moving it to a profession, so the mandatory entry-level training will be made available through 2 different providers in the province. So one would be through our private career colleges. So those are private vocational schools that are recognized by the province that meet certain standards and certain requirements. So out of that program, they'll be issued certification as completing mandatory entry-level training. Some of the private career colleges or the vocational truck training schools, our training is for entry-level training up into the test, but those schools can also offer longer training programs that move into the vocational components about, so once you get a job, what do you do after that? It'll be over and above the curriculum. So from the mandatory entry-level training up into the test, it's entry-level driving skills and competencies to take you to the test. But there are schools that offer multiple programs. So the mandatory entry-level training is 103.5 hours plus 12 hours for air brakes. But some of the private vocational schools offer programs up to 200 hours that line up with the national occupational standard that go beyond the driver training and move into the vocational aspects of being a professional truck driver. Does that help?